Hello, everyone. Gordon here. Gordon Causey, Gordy Canuck, Grow a Set, whatever handle you know me by, whatever. Close the window. It's hurting anyway. And Candy the Wonder Pup. All right. Shake paw. Lay down. And I should have peace now for the duration. I was going to be talking about anti-vaxxers, people who, when I talk about someone who's anti-vax, it's a very much a pejorative. It's a slur in today's world. It's like calling someone a flat earther or any number of derogatory terms. I don't view it. I never have viewed it that way. I have always known what the prevailing narrative is, and this is what I wanted to talk about tonight. But I wanted to bring up something just in case anyone has missed it, because I was at work all day and I missed this. There's been a massive explosion apparently at a Dow chemical plant somewhere near the Mississippi River. And wow. I mean, it's reminding me of what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, when with that train derailment, which was such an odd story because they leached what was it? Vinyl chloride, I think was the name of the chemical, got into the Ohio River, which I believe feeds into the Mississippi, and caused a toxic chemical cloud. And there were dead chickens and dead farm animals and dead wildlife, dead fish everywhere. And these things seem to be happening with an alarming frequency. And I just pulled up the article. It's in ABC News. Fire causes explosion at Louisiana chemical plant. Residents warned to stay indoors for hours. Officials say a fire at a Louisiana chemical plant, which I believe is Dow Chemical, triggered explosions, plural, that shook homes several miles away and sent flames and smoke billowing into the air. And I can't pronounce this. Plaquemine, Louisiana. A fire at a Louisiana chemical plant triggered. Flames erupted late Friday at Dow Chemicals plant on the Mississippi River near Plaquemine, south of Baton Rouge. Iberville parish officials told the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, that the fire started in an area of the plant that handles ethylene oxide, a flammable and toxic chemical. So as we had to look up vinyl chloride back when that train derailment happened in Ohio, East Palestine, Ohio, I think it was Ohio, but right on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, in very close proximity to Pittsburgh, if memory serves. Anyway, but that wasn't what I was going to talk about. That just, as I was getting this video ready to go live, that's when I saw this news, and I was like, wow. But I haven't read up anything on it. As much as I've read right now is what I know. It's just reminding me of what Klaus Schwab, back in, I think it was in November of last year, November of 2022, the G20, meaning the world's 20 largest economies, finance ministers and such, they had a G20 conference in Bali, Indonesia. And there was something of a parallel summit going on at the same time that was addressed by Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab addressed this parallel summit that was running somewhat in tandem with the G20 summit. And he was telling the assembled that the world can expect more black swan events as we are in this transitionary phase of the Great Reset, as we march towards a fourth industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, which I call the Fourth Reich. But getting back to what I wanted to talk about tonight, and that's anti-vaxxers and how this label, it's like you call someone a racist, call someone any number of slurs, and anti-vax is one of them. And I've never myself personally viewed individuals exercising their God-given right, in my view, to bodily autonomy for refusing a vaccine. It never bothered me. With that being said, I found it incredibly strange to have that label thrown at me. I had a family member, someone with whom I don't speak anymore, just screamed at me, "You're an anti-vaxxer," because I was refusing to get the COVID shots. And just to be clear, nothing in this video is to be construed as expert opinion or advice. It's just one individual's thoughts, views, and opinions, mine. I'm not saying get the COVID shots. I'm not saying not get the COVID shots. I'm just telling you about my own thought process, as it were. So for me to be called an anti-vaxxer, I found that I couldn't believe it, because I'm holding right here. This is my military immunization record. It's got my service number on it, so I don't want to flash it too clearly. Although I have blacked it out, but goodness knows with the way technology is these days. But yeah, it lists all the vaccines I got. I got Immovax polio, two shots, three shots for polio. I got MMR, measles, mumps, rubella. I got something called dTap, which is diphtheria, tetanus, I can't even pronounce this. Pertussis. Sounds a little like peritonitis, but pertussis. I don't know what it is. Hepatitis A, hepatitis B. Yeah. And what had happened when I joined the military, you go in during what was called indoc period, and they ask for proof of immunization, and I didn't have it. So I had all these shots, and I got to get them again. I have that scar that anyone around my age and older. No, it's on the left arm, and maybe it's. Oh no, you can still see it. It's right there. That was from, I think it was the polio shot. I got it when I was in grade 7, so when I would have been about, 12 years of age. And I still remember the experience well. No ill effects from it. Walked up. It was almost like a gun of types, and ka-chunk made a loud noise. Okay, done. And everyone was looking at their. When you were younger, it was quite a visible mark that you had. Scary word for a Christian. I'd gotten a mark, and I still remember there was one kid, Doug, a little tough guy. Doug was a shorter kid, but tough. I wouldn't say bully, but he had a chip on his shoulder. And I remember him going up, getting his shot, katung, and then he walked back toward us and face planted. Passed right out. That's, apparently that happens. People can have allergic reactions to inoculations, and that can lead to events like that. We were probably a class of 30 odd kids, and Doug was the only one who passed out. But part of my thinking comes from the conversation I had with Dr. Robert Malone during that recent podcast that I've shared, and you can find it on here on YouTube, or it's also on RUMB, the rest, and also on Spotify. And what I found, I presented Dr. Malone with a question about surrounding the fact that there's this prevailing narrative And this is the way I, lay person, non-expert, non-immunologist, non-vaccinologist, this is the way that I presented it, is that there's this prevailing narrative which says that in order for a vaccine to work, that basically pretty much everyone has to get it. And if everyone doesn't get it, then what will happen is an unvaccinated person it can become exposed to a virus. And the example I used when I was talking to Dr. Malone is just to narrow it down. Let's talk about measles. So everyone's been inoculated against measles except for, this small little cohort of people. And then one of them gets infected with measles, has no vaccine generated antibodies to fight off the infection. And so they get sick with the measles. And then the idea, this narrative that is played out to us is that the virus then can infect that person. And while they are infected, it can mutate, it can change. And that those changes may result in a variant of measles escaping and impacting those individuals, rendering their vaccines inert, useless, ineffective. And so there's this narrative out there that in order for vaccines to be effective, everyone has to get them. And Dr. Malone confirmed that, yeah, that's the narrative. And he said that it's a narrative that is promoted by the pharmaceutical industry, by the vaccine manufacturers. Makes sense. It would be certainly in their financial interests. That narrative is in their financial interest. It's a great narrative to have. Imagine you have a product and there's under the guise of science, there's this narrative out there that says everyone has to take your product. Great for your shareholders, great for the bottom line. But then Dr. Malone said that the narrative is not strongly supported by the evidence or the data. And it got me to thinking about, and we did not get into this during the podcast, but it got me to thinking about what are typically called cause and effect relationships. And I've always found it curious how, and I'm guilty of it too, I think we all are to an extent, of drawing a cause and effect relationship for things which confirm our bias. So if you have a biased view, if you have a bias towards vaccines and to thinking they work, then you look at something like, we'll go with measles again. I think a better example might be polio, but I'll stick to measles. I've never had measles. I was inoculated against it as a young child, and I never got the disease. And no one I know inoculated against measles has ever gotten the disease. Now, does that mean, so everyone got inoculated? That's event A. Event B is no one gets the disease. So does that mean that B was caused by A? Was it because everyone got inoculated that no one got measles? It seems a reasonable hypothesis, but has it been verified by data? Has it been tested? Has it been examined? Or do we just assume? The reason I say that polio might be a better example is because my own grandfather, my mom's dad, had polio. And polio infections peaked in countries like Canada and the United States in the very early 50s, 1950, 51, 52. The polio vaccines didn't come out until 1955. And they didn't seriously start rolling out until the years following that. So what you had is this big spike in polio. And then polio was already going down. And while it was going down like that already, this trending downward, at that point, the polio vaccines came out. And of course, no one knows anyone who got polio, but is it because, again, is it a cause and effect relationship? These are things everyone loves, cause and effect relationships, but only when they confirm a biased view. In terms of the COVID jabs, and again, not advice, not anything of that, not expert, just one man talking, one man thinking. When it comes to the COVID shots, I didn't get it or any of them. And then in February of 2022, so a year and a bit ago, I guess a year and a half or so ago, I did get sick. I had what are described as typical COVID symptoms, but in fairness, they're the symptoms of any number of diseases, colds, flus, and I'm sure some others. Maybe even a gastrointestinal bug would cause the type of symptoms I had. What I had on a Friday night, I spiked a fever with chills. I had aches, sore muscles, joints. I had a low-grade headache. I had a dry, non-productive cough, and that's about it. And that was Friday. Saturday, I was feeling great. I shouldn't say I was feeling great. I was feeling a little under the weather, but no aches, no chills. I wasn't spiking a fever. Still had a bit of a low-grade headache, a little bit of a non-dry productive cough, but no big deal. And that was Saturday. By Sunday, I was pretty much 90%. Still felt a little, fatigued, like a little like I'd run a bit of a marathon maybe. But by Monday, I was back to 100%. That was my experience with COVID. Now, one important point, I never got tested. So my infection was never medically confirmed. I've never had a PCR test. I call them nasal colonoscopies. I've never taken a rapid test. Although I sometimes wish I'd grabbed one of the kits so I could test my coffee or Coca-Cola like people have said they've done. I'd rather do it myself and see if what is said is true, that all these things often test positive. But regardless, I do tend to think it was COVID because around that time, going back February, March of 2022, there was this story coming out. You can check back on this. I'm basically 99.999% sure I've got this part right, that conjunctivitis was a common, shall we call it, a rebound effect, that after a COVID infection and recovery, that medical researchers were finding a significant incidence of conjunctivitis, also known as pink eye. And I got pink eye. First, I forget which eye it started, and I think it started in the left, but doesn't matter. I got it in the left eye. It stayed in my left eye for about a week. Then it cleared up and went into the other eye, and it took about a week to clear up, and then it went back again to the other eye. I went black, boom, boom, and it lasted 2-3 weeks. It was quite annoying because it stung, and there were like pustulates, like a pimple type thing with pus coming out of it. But then, thankfully, it was gone, and Bob's your uncle. I've been fine ever since. I was not worried when I got COVID, even though I was sure, okay, it's about time. I wasn't worried about it. I've had respiratory viruses before, flu. I've had it in my memory twice, once around 2006 and once again in around 2012, I think. Both during so-called flu season, both in the winter, probably January, February, and both times it knocked the living snot out of me. But it's the flu. And even though, people say, oh my gosh, I thought I was going to die. Yeah, that's what it's like. You feel like you're going to die. You're not going to die, but you still feel like death warmed over. The only thing is, I sometimes wonder, what if I had been programmed to believe that it was the killer flu, the way we had the deadly coronavirus, if messaging had all been about, deadly influenza virus? Would I have been afraid of dying because of it? And I think, I was just talking to a colleague, a coworker this evening or yesterday. within the last couple of days, I talked to this lady I work with, and she's an individual who has been religiously masking, and I was very surprised to see her not wearing a mask. And I asked her about it, and she said she'd had enough. It's too hot to wear, and 3 years is enough, and blah 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 blah. But she went on. She knows my stance. She knows my belief. She's never seen a mask on my face, and she wanted to know, or she wanted me to know, that she has a friend who, like me, COVID's nothing, da 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 da. And they got it, and it knocked the living crap out of them, and then they changed their tune. And I said, okay, cause and effect. It's the same type of relationship that we're drawing. We've all been told that coronavirus is a deadly virus. And yet, if you go to, I think it's the World Meter site, or go to Health Canada and look up the case fatality rate, not the infection fatality rate. The infection fatality rate is the rate of everyone who gets infected, whether they get that infection confirmed by a test or not. Case fatality rate is limited to just identified cases that are identified with a positive test and are recorded. And case fatality rate, as I understand it, is always going to be higher than the infection fatality rate. Ontario, I started to talk about this in a video a day or two ago. Ontario's Ministry of Health was putting out an epidemiological summary periodically, and you can look it up by just Googling IFR, infection fatality rate, Ontario COVID, and they broke it down by age. And basically anyone under the age of 60, their recovery rate was better than 99%. And if you're under 20, better than 99.9%. And even for those 80 plus, as I recall, and again, going off memory, I have a pretty decent memory, but it's not perfect. The recovery rate for individuals 80 plus, so people at the end of natural life expectancy, was still better, somewhere in the neighborhood of 92%. As I recall, the infection fatality rate for 80 plus year olds, all 80 plus year olds, including those in nursing homes and palliative settings and et cetera, was 7 point something percent. So yeah, better than a 92% recovery rate, even among people who are at the end of natural life expectancy. In Canada, men and women live on average to be about 80, somewhere around 83 years of age. So once you get into your 80s, if you look at things from an actuarial perspective, you're somewhat playing on the house's money. You've won the game. So getting back to anti-vax, is being anti-vax, I'm going to invite anyone who who agrees with this narrative that everyone has to get vaccinated, that everyone has to take a shot, or else an unvaccinated individual could get infected, and then the virus they get could mutate and thus get it out into the general population, the vaccinated population. And because of the mutations that took place in their unvaccinated body, now this new strain could defeat the vaccine-generated antibodies amongst those who did as they're told, or did as was strongly urged, and took the shots. And if you do believe that narrative, do you have any scientific data, any research, any randomized control trials to back it up? From what I understand, that's a difficult thing to do because of ethics. To examine it, would that involve exposing an individual, an unvaccinated individual, to what could be potentially a deadly, well, any virus can be deadly. I mean, influenza. I shouldn't say that because I'm not an expert. I shouldn't say any virus can be deadly. I don't know. But I do know influenza, at least according to Statistics Canada in 2018, influenza was said to have killed 8,511 people. So I think it's safe to say that influenza, the deadly influenza viruses, kills thousands of Canadians every year. But we never forced the influenza jabs on anyone. So would you have to examine this and to prove it scientifically and to have something like a randomized control trial? Would you have to take someone who is unvaccinated and expose them to a virus that, like an influenza, that could potentially take their life? Another thing that came up during the conversation with Robert Malone, a few years back, my youngest, I was reading a book. It's called The Great Brain. And it's about a family of three boys, mom, dad, three boys growing up in Aidenville, Utah. And it's set in somewhat pioneer times in the late 1800s. And there are three boys. There's Sven is the eldest, Tom, and John. And most will know that Utah is a predominantly Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saint. That's Salt Lake City, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, the whole bit. In this book, they are not. They're one of the few families that are not Mormons. And anyway, regardless, that's neither here nor there. In this book, what happens is when the boys get sick, when one of them gets measles, the other two boys are put into bed with that one. They're then put into their parents' bed, and they're told they're going to bunk down together until they're all infected, and they're going to get it over with. Likewise, anyone my age and even a bit older, I'm not sure when the chickenpox vaccines first came out, but I got chickenpox when I was 5 or 6 years old. Spots all over my body. And back in my era, and for a few years after, maybe 10, I'm not sure when the chickenpox shots came out, but by the time they came out, I didn't need it because I'd already been infected. I had apparently what Anthony Fauci once told a TV interviewer is the best form of vaccination is previous infection, is the highest form, at least it was according to him back when he did this interview. He was being interviewed, and the interviewer was asking Anthony Fauci, I have a colleague who just recovered from the flu. Does that person need the flu vaccine? He said, Fauci wanted to be very clear. He said, now, if they really had the flu, if they genuinely had the flu, there's no need to vaccinate them. They've already had the best vaccine available prior infection. So I didn't have to get the chickenpox vaccine. And as a matter of fact, on my immunization record, it's on here, and they made the doctor made a notation that, member stated has contracted varicella as a child, or varicella, I don't know how you pronounce it, which is chickenpox. Varicella vaccine not required. This, from what I understand, with my Facebook degree in immunology and virology, but from what I understand, this has been standard operating procedure for decades. That if you got infected before, you don't need to get inoculated. And so I've had COVID. I'm pretty darn sure. I'm not interested in doing antigen testing. I believe it's called antigen testing. And that's where they test you for antibodies, or even T cell memory to see if you have had whatever virus before. And but the point my winding point, and part of the reason I'm doing this is I want to have these conversations, and this helps me work through my thought process. Is What would have happened if no one had been inoculated with MMR? Now, I'm assuming, non-expert, don't know, but it's just an assumption on my part, that in rare cases, I imagine measles, mumps, rubella, that these so-called childhood diseases, what we used to call childhood diseases, could be fatal. Maybe even with chickenpox too, in rare cases. I mean, every kid I ever knew growing up, we all got chickenpox. We played with each other. Parents had chickenpox parties, so everyone would get infected. And I never knew of anyone dying. But regardless, I think it's possible. I assume it's possible that it could be, in rare instances, there could be complications resulting from a viral infection. There's no one size fits all solution to most things. Most things, individual variances are at play. But if no one had gotten the MMR vaccines, what would have happened? And would we be having epidemics of measles, mumps, rubella, or would life be going on as normal? I know there's a tendency in today's world, we like to think that advances in medical science, and certainly in the pharmaceutical industry, that they are the reason why we have this age. Canadians live on average to be about somewhere around 83 years of age, and that's historically high. And so cause and effect, again, the cause and effect relationship, well, it's because of the pharmaceutical and the medical industry and advances in medical technology. That's why people live as long as they do now. Now, I question that because in tandem with that, as these supposed medical advances have gone through, our world has gotten a lot cleaner. There is public sanitation. There's water purification. We have water treatment centers. It used to be cholera was a major, something that could break out majorly in densely populated areas because of dirty water. Well, now we all have running water coming into our houses, apartments, places of residence, and it's treated, and the world is a lot cleaner now than it used to be. Is it? And I sometimes wonder, yes, we're living longer now, but I don't think we're living any healthier. I think we're less healthy now than we were certainly, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Living longer, but living miserably. You see so many elderly people now with so many serious health issues. I've got a comment from Mickey Jock. Your COVID-like experience is exactly mine. 36 hours back to pretty much normal, but stayed off work for a week. Oh man, that's funny. I was just talking about that with someone at work this evening over the fact that so many people would milk a COVID case because, I can get some paid time off. Friend's orange juice just tested positive. It's insane. It's insane what we went through over the past 2-3 years. And my previous videos, I've got a warning. And the warning is that I strongly suspect it's not over. It's not over. This is all, in my view, this has all been part and parcel of, you can call it the Great Reset or the Fourth Industrial Revolution. You can call it Agenda 2030. You can look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the UN SDGs, and we're very early in the game. They call it Agenda 2030 for a reason. There's a point at which they want us to arrive in about 6.5 years from now. So we've got a long way to go. And they have not achieved the goals that they want. And the biggest goal this is going to sound, so I know that some will say, oh, get out your tinfoil hat. Fair enough. I don't care anymore. I've been saying this since 2020, and I wasn't the first to say this. There were people saying it years before I was. But there's an outfit called the Global Footprint Network, funded by the Gates Foundation, WAF, those types of organizations finance it, and they dole out money to universities like the University of Texas and others. And I read the University of Texas study, in which is supported by other institutions. And basically, they put forth this notion that planet Earth only has enough energy, resources, and raw materials to support a population of 2 billion or so people over the long term. The University of Texas study put it at 1.9 billion over the long term. And what their paper said is that the reason we've been able to climb to 8 billion people is because of reserves that the planet had built up, which have now been largely depleted. And the paper went on to contend that without a drastic reduction in the human population, that we were going to see privations of a biblical nature, like you're talking about people running out of water. And that's so. And there are two ways that it's presented. One, there's the number of people, and two, there's the amount of stuff we consume. And while in the number of people, the problem is in the developing world. You have China with 1 billion plus, India with 1 billion plus, sub-Saharan Africa with large populations, developing countries like Bangladesh, even India. And when I look at countries like India and China, I see kind of two countries. There's the rural areas, which are incredibly impoverished, and then there are the major corporate centers, which can be as Western as New York, London, Tokyo. And that's India and China. But anyway, so you have two sides to it. There's the number of people, and typically the number of people is not a Western problem. It's not a problem of the Western developed world. In the Western developed nations, typically birth rates are below what is needed to maintain the population. Canada just hit a population of 40 million, 40, and it's largely driven by immigration. It's all driven by immigration. If Canada stopped immigration completely, our population would start to go down. So, and that's, Canada's not alone. That's basically the entire Western world. But the problem we have in the West, so the problem in the West isn't how many kids we're having and our, birth rates going through the roof. Quite the opposite. The problem we have in our part of the world, according to the University of Texas Global Footprint Network and all their member academics, is that we consume too much, we use too much. A way it's sometimes put is to say that the world is divided into four slices of pie, and that the Western world makes up a quarter of the population, but we're eating 3/4 of the pie. We're eating 3 out of the 4 slices, and we're taking a bite out of the 4th. And so you need to reduce the consumption habits of us horrible Western consumers. I don't buy the narrative. I do not buy that narrative at all. It's been shown that there are reservoirs, oceans of water below the Earth's mantle, that there's more fresh water underneath the mantle than there are in all the world's oceans. And this concept of scarcity is a tool. And it's a tool that's used to drive fear. We had that fear early on in COVID. We're not going to have enough ventilators. Remember that? Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. I've got to go to church tomorrow. All my regular viewers, both of you, will know I'm a Christian. I profess Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And metaphorically speaking, people talk about the ark. Build yourself an ark. Well, Jesus Christ is the ark. It's the rock of our salvation. And if you're a Star Wars fan, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. Well, there is no Obi-Wan Kenobi. There is a Jesus Christ. And I know that evangelizing and professing the Christian faith is not, it's not a popular thing in our culture today. If anything, that gets you labeled as a racist and all kinds of other pejorative labels tossed at you for following the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But I'm going to church tomorrow, so I need to get to bed. And Mickey Jock, thanks for chiming in. I always appreciate engagement. And I'm not going to lie, when I get thumbs up, when I get another couple new subscribers, when people put in comments, oh yes, there's a little endorphin rush, little happy drugs go in the brain. Guilty as charged. I've said it before, and I'll reiterate it. This channel, my channel, it's not monetized. I don't get any money for this. I just enjoy the engagement. I enjoy the opportunity to put my thoughts out there, and also to test drive my thoughts in a fashion, to walk through them. And anyway, we'll see where things go. I might do another video tomorrow talking about what happened in, I guess it's Louisiana on the Mississippi River with, I believe it's a DuPont chemical plant blowing up and spewing, I forget what the name of the drug was, ethylene oxide, ETHYLENE, ethylene oxide, a flammable and toxic chemical. It's like East Palestine all over again. It's like that movie, and I forget the name of the movie, that they did, which mirrored exactly what happened in real life. Hey, I say I got another thumbs up. Thanks. All right. God bless everyone, and probably see you again tomorrow. And oh, by the way, the Wisdom and Knowledge podcast that we did with Dr. Robert Malone, we have more guests coming. Mark is incredible at getting these guys like Robert Malone who just blow me away. So talk to you later.